Let's begin with a word of prayer as we talk about our friend Kebet and his family in Ethiopia. Lord God, we thank you for the wonderful opportunity we've had to minister and partner with people over in Ethiopia. We thank you for the gift of Kebet and his family who came over here and how we got to know them and how we sent them back as missionaries, and we ask your continued blessing on that mission work over there. We pray this in your name. Amen. So here's Ethiopia. You see it on the map, and it's not far from the equator, so you expect it to be very hot, but it's at a very high elevation, most of it. And therefore, even though it gets a lot of the sunshine and so forth, it still has cooler temperatures than a lot of the other places in Africa. This also allows for rains that you wouldn't get normally and allows for farming and a much more substantial, therefore, population than you would have in other areas. If you look to the east end, you'll see the frontier going to the country of Somalia. That part's lower elevation, it's abject desert. If you look for cities, there are almost none there. It's also true in the far northeast part, where you have not only a low elevation, but actually a depression. It's under sea level, and that is a abject desert. The only people who really care about that part of the world are geologists because of all the interesting volcanic activity that takes place there. So, as I said, most of it is on a plateau, but there is this Rift Valley. And this Rift Valley, if I can point it out to you, cuts down, as you see, from the northeast, and then it cuts, and you'll see a series of lakes there. That's part of this huge valley that begins actually in Israel and makes the Jordan River and the Dead Sea and goes all the way down to areas in Africa. Any of you ever remember seeing, the movie with, it was about the lady Isaac Dennison, the Danish woman who went to Africa, and it was Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, and they showed all this beautiful African scenery there. Out of Africa. Well, what makes it so amazing there is the Great Rift Valley there. That's where you have a lot of your preserves and stuff. Well, Kebet lives along this Rift Valley. The area where he lives is not below sea level. It's up around 5,000 feet, but the mountains on either side go up to 8,000 feet. So you have this, and it means that he's at a lower altitude than north of the capital of Addis Ababa, which is 7,500 feet. And this has important in terms of climate. There's another reason why this is important. If you get up to like 7,000 feet and higher, something very important happens health-wise. Anybody know what happens health-wise? When you get below 7,000 feet, what do you have to worry about? What is the number one infectious disease in the world? It's not COVID. Say? Malaria. What happens to you when you get to 7,000 feet and above? Why no malaria? Why none? Pardon? No mosquitoes. Oh, you can have mosquitoes. It's not so much the mosquitoes as it is the parasite, the little, it's actually a one-celled animal that causes it. And that under those pressure situations, it doesn't affect you. In World War II, we took our soldiers Marines took all the Marines who had malaria, and they took them to the island of Maui and to the higher elevations there was up at a camp around 8,000 feet, and they'd recover there. All right? So if you're in the capital, you don't have to worry about malaria, but where we were, you had to. I know when we were in Addis Ababa, you didn't have to worry about sleeping at night with any kind of net coverings, but everywhere where we were in Kebet's area, every night we had nets by us. So here you see the area of Ethiopia again. You see, I've listed there the capital, Addis Ababa, and south of it is where you'd have the area where Kebet lives. Okay, Christianity came to Ethiopia in the 400s through an Egyptian missionary named Frumentius, and it was eventually adopted by the king. And the church, under that direction, became part of what was called the Coptic Christian Church in Egypt. Do any of you remember Semia? Yes. Who was Semia to you? She was from the Coptic Christian Church. Yeah, and there's still that church. Yes, yeah. And the Coptic Church is the ones that missionized Ethiopia. And they had connections with them. But then what happened to the Coptic Church? It was overrun by the Muslims around the 600s. And after that point, the Ethiopian church was separated from the rest of Christianity and kind of formed on its own. Now, why would you have a church there? Well, again, it goes back to the geography of what's going on there, because if you look at Ethiopia, being in this high mountain area means that the Muslim invaders conquered the areas in the lower elevations, but in the mountains they kind of left them alone. And that's why the Coptic Church, or it's called the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, was able to exist on its own, but in isolation from the rest of Christianity. Only started getting back with the rest of the Christianity in the 19th century. All right? And here's an example of the Orthodox Church with the Orthodox priests and the worshipers in white, and then some of their churches. There are these magnificent churches that you have in the upper elevations of Ethiopia, and they're not built out of stone, they're carved out of stone. If you look at it, they dug out a hole and then carved out the church out of the stone. So it's not you build blocks and put it up, but you literally dig it all out. Amazing churches. The high country, like I said, was not overrun by the Muslims. So it not only was the only place where you didn't have Muslim dominate in the area, but also of all of Africa, it is the only place that was not colonized by European nations by the 1800s. Every other part of Africa by World War I was controlled by a European power except Ethiopia. Here you see the political divisions of Ethiopia. In the north, you will see it says Amhara and Tigray. That's the heart of the traditional Ethiopian area, the high mountain area where traditional Ethiopian culture was. Afar, which is to the left of, that's the low part, the Danakil Depression, that, Somalia area, approaching Somalia, south of Oromia, those are all lower elevations. Those are predominantly Muslim. As you get towards the southwest area, you got places that are like the southern nations, which is kind of a hodgepodge, and then over to the west, Gambela, where it is more traditional African, and the religions over there were traditional African religions. And in terms of missionary work, you didn't do a lot in the east because it's all Muslim denominated, and not a lot in the north because that was Orthodox, where the European missionaries did most of their work is in the south, and it was primarily the people who were tribal religions. All right? Now, Amhara and Tigray, again, it's north. That's where it's Orthodoxy. And politically, these are the groups that controlled the nation of Ethiopia. In fact, the big problem came that Tigray, which is the three main groups are Oromia, Amhara, and Tigray. And the Tigray, which is the smallest of the three, ended up controlling the politics of the country. And recently there was unrest in Ethiopia, and now they have a new president who's Oromian, which is the largest majority, just behind them Amhara, and the vice president Amhara, and they're trying to now have peace and make sure that all the tribes are treated more equally. There's hope for the future for them that way. Okay? The southern nations, like I said, that's primarily tribal. That's where Awassa is, where Ethiopia lives, where Kebeda lives. This is primarily an area where the Scandinavians did a lot of the mission work. So traditionally, the Missouri Synod had no work in that part. Missouri Synod work traditionally was in West Africa, especially in Nigeria. East Africa was primarily done by Europeans, and since it was done by the Europeans, and the European Lutheran churches had fellowship with what would have been the old LCA, the Lutheran Church of America, that would be where their missionary efforts were. For instance, south of Ethiopia is Kenya, and south of that is Tanzania. Tanzania, up until World War II, was called Tanganyika, and who controlled that? Anybody know? Germany. So a substantial Lutheran population there, and that's why you had a lot of missions in Tanzania. Missouri Synod had nothing to do with them because that was the other Lutherans. But what has happened in the last 20, 30 years is how are these African Lutherans compared to Lutherans in this country? What would the feelings of the typical African Lutheran Christians be compared to, say, the ELCA today? Pastor Splett, what do you think? Yes, they're much more conservative. And so they've been sending their people not to ELCA seminaries, but to Missouri Synods. And so therefore, there's been a lot of new work that's gone on in East Africa, which we never did, because the African Lutherans say, we want to work with you guys because we believe what you believe. All right? Now, so a lot of the work was in the south. To the east, west, you had Gambella. A lot of the work there has been done because of the Sudanese refugees. So as they've come there, we've been able to work with the people there. This is the original Norwegian compound. This is where the area where they have a compound where Kebeda used to live. And this is where they also house what's called the South Central Synod of the Ethiopian Church. Now, they use the same term as ELCA. You don't have a Missouri, you don't have a Iowa District West or an Iowa East. Here in Iowa, you have the Southeast Iowa Synod, the Northeast Iowa Synod, and the West Synod. They call their districts synods. So that's what they do in Ethiopia too. So the South Central District or Synod is located there. Now, during the 1970s and the 1980s, Ethiopia was ruled by a dictator named Mengistu, who became a hard-line communist. And during that time, there was persecution of all religions, not just Lutherans, not just Orthodox, even Muslims. But during that time, there was a lot of government unrest, and both the Muslims and the Orthodox were looked down on by the government, but the Lutherans, and that says EECMY, that's the Ethiopian Evangelical Church Makane Yesu, that's their church, the Lutheran church in Ethiopia. They had a good reputation because they were peacekeepers, because they didn't react to the government in violent ways like other faiths did, and they gained a good reputation. That's one of the reasons why, unlike many other churches, this church was allowed to stand. All right? And when Mengistu fell after a civil war, then the government started to ease up and allow religions to exist. The main concern among the government is that no religion tries to dominate against the other. So the faith that's had most problems with the government now has been the Muslims, because they are the ones that cause trouble. The Orthodox in between, but the Lutherans have a wonderful reputation in the government because our Lutheran theology. What's our Lutheran theology about government? Church and state. And what's our understanding of the fourth commandment? If you obey your parents, who else are you supposed to obey? The government. The government. There's that respect for government that gives us a good reputation over there. Okay, now we look at these other areas, and we see them also as a language area. You get the Oromia dominant in the south, and the Amhara language is the traditional Ethiopian, kind of the official language of the country. But in the area where Kebeda does most of his work, has been doing most of his work, is an area dominated by Oromia and the Oromia language. And this is an example of some of the work they're doing. Even though his church is located in the very north part of the south central part, they have missions throughout the North Oromia area, and even as far as this area called Afar in the northeast. This is what Afar looks like. The only thing you can do there normally is just have sheep to graze. It's an area that's so dangerous that the State Department does not recommends you don't travel there. All the men have these menacing swords, very dangerous, and yet they've done mission work. And the way they did this was by bringing about water to the area. And their mission there has water there. They grow crops. They grow sesame, which is a very profitable crop. and they use that to support the mission. Now, here's the map of more of the general area where Kibeta lives. And if you look at this map, you will see that the arrow pointed there, there's Hawassa at the bottom. That's where he does his work. That's where he exists. And you see a lot of the mission work is in the area to the north of it, the Oromia area. I'm going to look first at this one area called Melka Ode. And here's a picture of the people at the Melka Ode mission. And you see some of the people there, including Kibeta. Kibeta, who is the second one, and his wife, Kitu. Abate was the driver when I went there in 2014. Kibeta had a surgery that weakened him, and he wasn't able to drive, so Abate drove us around. The advantage was when we went into the Oromo areas, Abate speaks Oromo because he is Oromo. Kibeta is not. So in a lot of the talking with the people, local people, either Abate would do it or Kitu, because she is Oromo too. And here's another picture at the mission at Melka Ode, and the woman there in front of the door, the older woman, she's the one that owns the property and donated to the church. Here's Biseko. And Biseko here has a school there, and the wonderful thing is we help to place this water storage area, which enables them to water the slope that goes down from the church to the stream. And because of that, now they have crops to support the mission work and to help the local people in the community. And here you see another gathering of the people there. And then you have the mission at Aliwoho, where, again, you have a mission and you have a school. And schools are real important because the government allows you to put a church up if you promise to, what they call, improve the land. Now, it's not enough just to have a church then. You have to do something for the community, and one of the ways they do it is by having schools. Now, these aren't regular schools. These are schools that are for real younger grades, and they do these schools, and it really helps with the community. And one of the advantages they have is they can teach religion, although they don't call it religion, they call it morals, but they can teach them the gospel that way. And here's an example of the classroom here. And the teachers, the thing that was amazing is it's kind of like the way it used to be here in this country. Most teachers, of course, for kids were women. And what did you need education-wise in the old days in the one-room schoolhouse to teach? You couldn't be married. Do you remember UNI, when women went to UNI to teach? How many years did they go to UNI? 2 years, remember? They only had to go 2 years. Right. But before that, even before that, what did women need in terms of education to teach school? That's correct. And before that, a high school education. My mother graduated from high school, the Lutheran High School in Milwaukee, and that made her eligible to teach. So how old are these women teaching? They're teenagers, and that's the women we saw. In fact, one principal we saw was 20 years old, very young. And like the way it used to be here, what'd you say, Dean, about these women?
They got married. They got married.
Yeah, they couldn't be married. All right. Then, interesting side note, as we pass through these areas, we'd go to this place called Shashamene, which is like the twilight zone in the middle of Ethiopia, because this is a place where you have Rastafarians from Jamaica. For many years, Ethiopia was run by an emperor. It was always run by an emperor, and this is the final emperor, Haile Selassie. He was overthrown, and then the communists took over. But Haile Selassie was seen by the Rastafarians as Jesus Christ. So he invited some of them to come over, and there is a Rastafarian community in Shashamene. Really bizarre. As you comment, instead of people speaking Ethiopian, they're speaking Heyman, Jamaican. All right, Walagasi, another mission site. Here is at a lower altitude, so it's much drier. And what Kebeta did here is helped us build a pipeline from a well. And because of this, now the church has flourished, and it's a big help to the community. We have pictures of what it used to look like, and it was just kind of barren. Now it's just trees all over the place, and all because of the water that's available to them. And here's a training center that they have there too as well. And then Arsinigale, which is kind of the headquarters for a lot of the work in this area, where they not only have a church, but a big training center, which was built by funds from the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod. And here's some of the bicycles and motorcycles that we helped to purchase. For many of the evangelists, it's better for them to have bicycles than motorcycles because the way the roads are there, you can't really do it with a car. And of course, the expense of a car is much, much more. They're happy to have a motorcycle. And this enables them to travel from their home village to the sites like Arsinigale, where they can train and be ready for doing their work in their villages. And this is a picture of the group of people in the training section. And they're evangelists. Evangelists. There are predominantly men. Later on, I'll share that with you. Predominantly there are men, and that's because of the traditional communities, the way they are in their culture. But a lot of our work is not just simply to help these people with their farming, but especially to help the evangelists. Because if we make the evangelists better farmers, A, that frees them up to do their work as evangelists, and B, it gives them a good reputation in the community because they're successful farmers, therefore helping their witness. All right? And here's some examples of some of them. Fayuso was a singer who got pneumonia. He pretended to be a policeman and robbed people. A friend brought him to a conference. He heard the music but thought it was secular. Then he saw the happy faces on people. When he was baptized, he felt a load off him. Kamanda was a Muslim until Makana Jesus and Arsinigale witnessed him. Tafasa was led to the church by a friend. Dahabi was a former Muslim. Colby, church started at his home. Before he was a Christian, he had a bad life. His father was Orthodox. When he remarried, his father often came home drunk. Golby had a knife to protect the family. He tried to be a good Orthodox. He sold a donkey to fund a ceremony. He came to faith through the Makana Jesus. So this is so typical these evangelists are. And then the most remarkable mission in there was Kersam Katemi, which is not only way isolated, it's way high up in the mountains. And it looks totally different. It's just packed with trees, and it gets really cold at night. Now, you were asking the question, Connie, if you look up here, you see, I don't know if you can see it real clearly, but there's a woman in the back. It's kind of dark between the two white-haired women. Her name is Tashay, and she is a woman evangelist. Now, all right? And it's a long process to get the land for the government because you've got to get it and you've got to show that you can prove. And that's one of the things that Kebeta has done a lot is worked on finding and getting through the regulations to get the property. And it's a great blessing to have the land, not just because you have a site where you have church. That's probably one of the least important things. So they can always find somebody's home to do that, or even they'll worship outside. They need it for two more important reasons. One, so they can grow crops to help fund the mission, and so they have a place to bury the dead. Why is that important? Well, in these areas, all the cemeteries are controlled by Muslims, and you have to be a Muslim to be buried there. Do you know what's different about a Muslim funeral and a Christian funeral? When we have funerals, what often happens? A person dies, right? And when's the funeral? Why is it a couple days later? What happens with Muslims? 24 hours. They'd be buried. Yeah. And that means that unless you're a Muslim and been registered and so forth, you're not going to find a place to be buried in. So by having this land, they have a place for cemeteries, because that's an obstacle that gets in the way for people to becoming a Christian. All right? And It allows them with this property to have schools too, which allows them to improve the land, work in the community, have the cemeteries, and this one is in the center of a highland area, and it becomes an area where you can do Christian mission within Muslim areas, and because they're doing things to improve the land, the local people don't object to them. And here's a, yeah.
How much land are you talking about?
Several acres, yeah. It depends. Some are smaller, some are bigger. But generally, they're not going to get just a land to put church on. They're going to have several acres around it so they can do farm work. So building a church can help growth. People will be invited here and will say, are you taking me to a house? Muslims have Arab money to build mosques every 5 kilometers. Now, so they have no problem with the money, but it's harder for the Christians. There could be a training center to work with the 37 villages in the area, and the area only recently got some electricity, unlike in Lower Lowndes. The sewers are open, so it's a very primitive area. And then you see the Hawass area. You have this whole rural area they've been working, but they've also been starting all kinds of churches in the Hawass area itself. Here's one. Oh, I couldn't see the thing on there. Yeah, Monopole, which was a tobacco farm. And then you see here Al-Amhara Mission, which is in the Hawass area. This is a newer one at Referral. And then to the east, as you go from Hawass, as you travel east, you get up in the mountains. You're up several thousand feet, and it was much cooler there. There you have churches here at Kafole. This is Bole Hatenza Mission near Kafole. Here's the Wursa Mission. Here's Hamas Gabaya. So you see all these mission areas around there. And then we're back at Awassa. Here's where the Synod, the southeast, that's their district, has its. This is where they have Compassion International office and the people that work there, and they work especially with poorer families that are enrolled in school. There's a coffee house they built there for youth ministry. This is the staff at the school here, which is both a grade school all the way through high school. And you can always tell who the teachers are at high school because they wear lab coats, all the teachers. And they have fruit trees. Everywhere Cabetta goes, he grows fruit trees, which provides, some food for the people if they sell it for mission work. And real importantly, what do these trees do? Shade and lack of erosion, because those are big things. Cabetta's been involved with a lot of forestation projects, which the government loves. And what's happened is a lot of them now, he isn't participating in as much because the government's now doing it, but they appreciated how his people kind of showed them the way, and because erosion is such a big problem. The other thing is they grow a lot of eucalyptus, which grows very quickly. That's their main construction. You know, when we build a building here in the United States and put up a wall, you will see all the metal. What do you call it? To get up there different level. What? No, the outside construction, scaffolding. I was already thinking of scaffolding. Metal scaffolding. Ethiopia, you see a construction, it's all eucalyptus, all wooden. And you look at it and say, gee, this is going to hold anybody. It looks really scary. But that's what they use for everything. And by having this eucalyptus, they have it so that they have plenty of construction material, but also, since it grows rapidly, they don't have to worry about deforesting the area, and it really helps prevent erosion. And here yes? Yeah, you do. When you go in the highlands, you will, yeah. There are forests all over there that they've helped to plant. And here he is with a typical farming situation. He'll take a group of the farmers, and he'll buy, with our funds that we've given him, both the seed and the fertilizer, and then also helps to transport it to those areas where they're going to with his truck. And they also go to the market and get ox. And what he always does is you only get one ox. But if you're going to do any work, you always have to have 2 ox. All the plows and stuff are designed for 2 oxen. So what does that mean? You have to learn to cooperate. You can't, so there's kind of a collect. It's kind of like in the old farming communities where, farmers used to, some of you might know better than I, used to borrow equipment and stuff like that, do some harvest together and stuff. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yep. And so that's involved in his work in that way. And here you see them picking some of the things. And they also supply tools and the oxen and then the fruit trees, again, like I said. And here you see what he uses the truck a lot for is to haul the trees. And you see that all over the place. And some of the fruit trees they grow: papaya, banana, avocado, plum, mango. They had bananas by his house when we visited, and you could tell because plenty of monkeys were around. And there's the eucalyptus, which is used as a shade plant. Also zigba, which grows quickly and is very good for shade. And this shows you typically how his truck was used. This is a man named Gudima Tumisa. He is the traditional, he is the kind of the father of the Ethiopian Lutheran Church. And he had a whole concept of what he called holistic ministry. And the idea behind it is that you want to meet all the needs of a person. Now, we think of that traditionally as that you provide physical needs for people, and then they're attracted to you, and then you start. But their understanding is not only do you work with the physical needs of the people, but right off, you do the evangelism work. You share the gospel right away because you're showing that you care for them wholly as a person. And that's very much evident in how they do their ministry and their mission, that the people who are providing the physical needs and for those ones are also the people who are trained to share the gospel at the same time. Here's an example of one of the many missionaries working as a retired principal, and you see that kind of ministry that's going on. And also important to know Workito's ministry. One thing we found out, Workito knows everybody. Everybody knows her. And she's part of the women's ministry there. She received training at a local Bible school, and she lives in Bible school. But one of the things that's really important about her is her Oromo language skills. Here's some of the work that they do. If you remember, one of the things that she learned here that she's passed on, she learned how to knit. And now, because getting knitting threads pretty inexpensive, teaching these women how to knit, and they sell these products for missions. And you see the women's group there. Now, the main language in Ethiopia is Amharic, and they have a different alphabet. Here's John 3:16 in Amharic. And here is the language that's dominant in that area, Oromo. Notice Oromo, since it was put into a written language much later, did not use the Ethiopian alphabet. It used a Western one because their alphabet, their written language was developed by Westerners. Now, Amharic is the school language, the language you know throughout there, but the area they work on is predominantly Oromo, and this is where she comes in real advantages because she will go out with missionaries or preachers and she'll translate. I can remember that when we were traveling, there was a lot of conversation going on between Workito and Abate, the driver, because they were doing it in Oromo, and they were the ones who didn't understand a word they said, and of course, I didn't understand a word they were saying either. And again, here you see your children and all that. Now, for us today, what might be important for us to see today is that Kebeda wants to now, nearing the end of his career, focus on Gedoli. Now, Gedoli is not in Awassa, it's to the west. It's where he is from. A lot of the ministry has been well established now in the Awassa area, but he wants to help. And there's been work in this area, but he wants to develop it. One of the areas where it's been helped is they've taken a lot of young men from the Gedoli area and brought them to Awassa where they can receive training to do their mission work. And one of the real helpful guys to him, I don't know if you can see the picture of him, he's the second from the left. That's Sisay. Sisay was a judge, but now he works in Awassa as a lawyer helping churches in their relationship to the government. Another one is Kisimo, who's an elder in the lowland congregation. Tisabi is from the Highland congregation. He deals with young entrepreneurs. Gongora went to the Norwegian school with Kebeda. El Chilu and Nazriel and Ephraim and Dadafe, who are in present, are young men training to be evangelists. There are 11 outreaches from 2 congregations in Gedole. They have become full-time congregations, a total of 1,500 members. Fruit Farms of the churches help to support the evangelists who go to Tabor Church, the church in Owasso, to train. That agriculture is mainly done by hand. There are some Orthodox and Muslim, but most of the people are the traditional animists, traditional nature worshipers. It's only been newly electrified. 85% of it is forest. It's a lot more rainy than this is more like we would think of jungle Africa, all right? And their main crop is sorghum. Now, traditionally in Ethiopia, especially in the highlands, their traditional crop is something called teff. It's kind of like a miniature wheat. It's not near as productive as wheat, but it can grow in some of the drier conditions, higher altitudes. And they make a kind of pancake that they ferment, and that they make out of this fermented teff a kind of a pancake called injera. That's like their bread. The typical meal is you take and cook something up. Well, kind of like Hispanics, you have a tortilla. Orient, you have rice. Well, in Ethiopia, you put everything on your injera. But where he's from, they didn't have injera because they didn't have teff. They had sorghum. They had more of a mush. And here's examples of some of the agriculture that's been done in that area. And he wants to work in that area because it's more newer, and also because, like I said, a lot of the work has been established in the area where they live in Owasso. And he still wants to live in Owasso because that's where his children now have their jobs. Their son, Muse, works for the church doing their IT work, and their daughter Mariam is a doctor. But also because that the mission work is being done by the Tabor Church. This would be a mission of the Tabor Church to extend in the Gedole area. Now, I don't know if I can find a good picture of both of them, but if you look at Kebeda and Workito, you'll notice they look different. Kebeda looks like what we consider a typical African. But if you look at Workito, she looks like a typical Ethiopian. Ethiopians look different than Africans because there was a lot more Middle Eastern influence. The Ethiopian face is narrower than the typical African face because she is from a more of an Ethiopian background. He's really from way in the West. It's more African, more like people you would know from Kenya or from South Africa or Nigeria. And so working in the Gedole area will be different, but it gives him an opportunity because of his language skills, because he's from there, and because of the work they've done with these men who have come to Owasso and done their work. Now, just to quickly, some other slides that we have here. I think this is the Tabor Church. Pastor Dave, if you can switch that other one. And we won't have time. What's our time right now? 10:20. 10:20, okay. Yeah, we're going to go quickly through this other. This is just a collection of pictures that we received in the last year from Kebeda to show about what things are like now. All right. Can I advance this, or do you have to do it? Yeah, which is fine. I don't mind. This is, this is one of the 2 main missions in Gedole area. You can advance it. Okay. You don't have sidebars showing? It's not getting that. Oh, okay. All right, I'm sorry. I know it does it on the computer. Yeah. I should have put it into PowerPoint. Well, while he's doing that, questions that any of you have on this? First of all, let's start with some questions. Yes?
Not a question. I just think for what little we give, what he's done is absolutely.
Well, you do have the result of the difference in economy that to support somebody like that is not like supporting him here. If we were supporting him here, we'd have to expend far more funds because of the difference in costs and stuff like that. Even though the tricky part in Ethiopia is, we think about inflation here, but inflation is not near as drastic as in countries like that. There it can just, double overnight kind of thing. And the other thing is you don't know what the government's going to do in terms of taxes, and that would certainly impinge on the truck. Because getting a truck isn't just a matter of paying for the truck per se, it's paying all the tariffs that the government charges for it. Sometimes you're paying more for the tariff than you are for the truck itself. Yeah. Yeah.
How far is it from his home to the
Godola? Okay, yeah. Day's journey because of the roads. It was, in the old days, a day's journey to get from the capital in Addis Ababa down south to where he lives in Awassa. But the government is slowly but surely putting a main highway there to the point now it takes you a half day. And it'll almost like an interstate they have there where you could take it just a few hours. Because otherwise what you do is you go down a road that's just 2 lane. It's like, well, I'll give you an example. 69 going down to Des Moines. Before I-35, how long would it take people to get between Des Moines and Ames? Much longer. And even more so before the build-up. My father-in-law lived in Ames in the late 40s and commuted to AIB in Des Moines, and that would take him half a day sometimes because of the way the roads were. And in Ethiopia, you not only have to worry about the fact that you just have the narrow roads, but when you go through the towns, you got to stop for everything. And of course, what do you have to stop for there that you don't have here? Cattle, sheep. They just wander over, and people. You're going through town, and you have people walk in the middle of the road, and you got to wait for them. You can honk your horn all you want; they won't care. So. But now with the superhighway, it's going to be a lot quicker. But the roads going to Godola are still older. In fact, before she died, they would visit his mother, and they would have to park the truck and walk half a day to get to where she lived.
How easy is it to get
Fuel? In the cities, you can get it. Yeah, you can get it in the cities and so forth. But you do want to make sure that you fuel ahead of time. Yeah. And of course, that's the advantage of a truck, which carries more. And you also have to have twice when we were there, when I was there, they had a flat tire. So you always got to carry spares because of the way the roads are. Yeah. And I went there with Joel Neibauer, who's now with the Lord, back in 2014. And we went there. Gabetta has you travel in November because it's dry season, because you can get to the place. Some of these places like that one way up in the mountains, Kirsakatama, you can't get there in the rainy season because the roads are so bad. The rainy season tends to be in the early part of the year. Early part of the year. When we come in November, that's harvest season. So you hope to have your rain in the spring, what would be our spring, summer. Yeah. And by the fall, it'll dry out. And for them, seasons aren't winter, spring, summer, and fall. It's dry season, wet season. Typically, varies in the tropics. You don't have that much difference between winter and summer, temperature-wise, because you're near the equator. Which, one of the things you noticed was that you had to really make sure that you had sunscreen and hats and stuff, because the sun is so intense at that angle. Even in the summertime, we don't have the kind of sun they have because it's so high up. Yeah.
2 questions. One about the sort of civil war that's going on there.
Yeah.
What's the status of that? Second question is, what's the environment that he lives in relative to whether
Yeah, yeah. The first, you were talking about the government situation. There was unrest, a lot of unrest, especially in that Oromo area, because they objected to the way that the Tigray was dominating everything. And then when they got the Oromian president, that calmed down. But now there's been some tension from the Tigray up in north, but that doesn't affect Kebeda. He's way down the south. And even when you had the other unrest, it was not actually in where he lives in Awassa. It was traveling between there. Like if you want to go to Addis Ababa, you would have to worry about going to the Oromo areas. In terms of him with the government, the Lutheran Church has such a good reputation because of the way they work and cooperate with the government. The religions had the most problems with the government is the Muslims, because they're just not as cooperative. They cause trouble. And the government, as long as you listen to them, as long as you obey, not a problem. They're kind of impartial. You know, they don't favor any one religion over the other. And he's worked well with them, and they have a good reputation, and so they're able to do things. And not only that, but they've also worked well with local Muslim majorities to open things up. Now, that won't be a problem in Al Gadola. They don't have Muslims there. Yep.
Do you know if the religious affiliation is of the government leaders?
No, that's not real important, because the government leaders are more attuned to having things equal. Remember, they came out of a communist system too. But the key issue, which is one of the things that Kebeda is constantly working, is tribes. Your religion isn't so important in Africa. It's your tribe. And so much of the unrest there is between the different tribes. And Kebeda's mission work is purposely non-tribal. And that's even a problem within the church itself. It's very significant for Kebeda that he is a member of Memorial Lutheran Church in Ames, because then he doesn't have any tribal connection. He is above that. He's not a part of the tribes. And he's very important, because we met with the South Central Synod district people, and well, really nice people and so forth. And afterwards, he said, "You know all those people there?" "No, yeah, well, they're all members of the same tribe." And he purposely works against that. That's so important to him to cut that down, because that tribal thing is what causes the problems. What was that African country? It's by Burundi. Oh gosh, where you had the massacres. Rwanda, yes. Rwanda, you had massacres of populations. Now, the people on both sides of that were both Roman Catholic, but they were from two different tribes. And so you had Roman Catholic people massacring other Roman Catholic people. Had nothing to do with religion, it was all tribal. In Sudan, you would hear about, the Christians in the south being persecuted by the Muslims in the north. Much more so, it's tribal. The tribes, that's why South Sudan is such a mess, because even though they're a country and supposedly they're free from Muslim control, they've got so much tension between the different tribes there, it's ridiculous. And it's the big problem in Africa, again and again and again. That's what Kebeda's really trying to fight against, not being tribal. Other questions? Oh, I should repeat for some of you who don't know. Kebeda came here years ago under a Fulbright scholarship in agronomy. He worked at an agriculture research place, not in Awassa, it was further north, and that's how he got to meet Workitu. Is in a coffee growing area. Ethiopia is where coffee was first developed. And he came over here, and since he had gotten involved with the Lutheran Church over there, especially as a student, when he was a student in Addis Ababa, in the capital, he came to church here, got to know the people here, and befriended them. And then when we learned about his family situation, we helped to finance to get his wife and then 2 children over here. And then when they went back, we sent him back as an agricultural missionary, and got connected with that church there because we knew they were doing great mission work. And that's how we got to know him in the first place. So, It's been harder to do this stuff because we don't have him here or have that memory of having his family here like we did maybe 20 years ago, but we're still trying to keep that up and let people know about that. Hey, any other questions? Yeah, yeah. And you see that in that the two eldest children, Mariam and Musay, who got a lot of their formative education here in the United States, when you go over there and you talk to those two, you sound like Americans. Burkitu and Kebeta have the strong accents, and you talk to other kids who are well-educated in English, they speak English but an accent. Burkitu and Musay speak like Americans. Because the thing is, you find out, is that kids do not learn their accent from their parents, they learn it from their peers. You learn your accent from your peers. And that's why they still have an American accent. He is an American citizen. He now, because he's done spent so much, he has an American accent too. But the youngest Noah isn't quite as much, because he's more Ethiopian. Noah was born there when they returned, but Solomon was born here right before they left, and therefore he has American citizenship, and he's now studying in Odessa, Texas area. Yeah. Yep.
It was God's plan for him to be in Ethiopia, it seems, because he tried to get a job in the U.S. That was
Yep.
his primary plan. And I can read quite a bit about that. He just didn't compete well.
Nope.
And it was meant for him to go back home.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And because he not only has the agricultural skills, but he's a devout Christian and knows his Bible and stuff like that, because his work isn't just doing agriculture. He spent a lot of time in prayer and Bible study too. It's the holistic, the whole model, as the emphasis is.
Any idea how many more years Kebeta will be active?
We're thinking at this point maybe 5. We're getting to that point. That's why he wants to concentrate on Godola toward the end. He's seeing that as terminal, as his final area of work. And it's not the huge area that some of the other mission work was doing, but it is a little distance away. But he's hoping to focus on that at the end, and then he can, go to retirement. Yep.
How often do you communicate with them?
Pastor Dave, you're the one that sets that up. You want to know how often we communicate? Maybe explain how we do that. The advantage we have is Musay's tech ability and Pastor Dave's tech ability.
Yeah, it's been a lot easier the last couple of years. We're able to use the video function on Facebook Messenger. And I know it's having there, it's about once a month or so average. I think would be about what we do. But yeah, now that they've got more consistent, more reliable internet in Pelasta, it's easier than when we had the time of phone calls and things. So we'll often talk to them. It'll be morning here, and it'll be kind of supper time there. That seems to be what that works too.
Yeah, another thing that they want to do is it's not just the Wi-Fi, but what happens at that point is they have less problem with brownouts. The big problem there is half the time the power's off. So, for instance, with their water supplies, every house has a tank. And that tank stores water because the power goes out. That way you still have water pressure for using your toilets and your sinks. So, half the time there, the power's out. Yeah.
Are there other churches that support Kebeta or Burkitu, or is it
Just us with them. There's other churches working in the support with the Tabor congregation and so forth. Yes, there's other churches throughout the country here who support them and have supported them. But in terms of Kebeta and Burkitu, we're their main source of support. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the missionaries we prayed for is in Ethiopia. And I think her husband's teaching at the seminary in Homs, where the headquarters of the County Church is.
Yeah. Yeah, we have not traditionally been there because, like I said, that was the Scandinavian Lutherans area. but now we've been invited more and more in the areas, but not in the Awas area. It's been especially in the Addis Ababa, and also in the areas we were working in areas near the Kenya border, the Sudanese border, because of the refugee situation.
Is Kibeta considered an evangelist then?
Yeah, I guess you would consider, he is considered an evangelist, but also an agricultural expert. His office, he is Dr. Kibeta. They call him Dr. Kibeta because they recognize him as a
He's doing mission work, but I don't
yeah, yeah,
consider an evangelist.
yeah, he would be,
That
yeah.
other evangelists.
He wouldn't be considered, no, because the other evangelists are just, they're part-time, in other words. They are farmers. They're doing that on the side. This is his job. So he would be a step on. He's not a pastor, but he would be seen as Dr. Kibeta, I guess.
I'm just going to comment. One of my most pleasant memories is the congregation meeting that we had in the basement when we made the proposal to support the daddy discussion that followed, and then unbelievable, unanimous, enthusiastic vote to support that, and been going ever since. Just one of my pleasant memories of a church congregation meeting.
Yeah, and you go to those churches and you see the people that are there. I mean, it's just, yeah. And these are also lots of people, converts. These are not people, oh, I've just transferred another church. These are, like I mentioned, these elders, you saw their backgrounds and you'd interview them, and yeah, it's just a wonderful blessing that God's working that way.
When's the last time you were over there?
2014. More recently, Pastor Gherkin went over there with his wife, and for instance, the church building was under construction. I went there with Pastor Gherkin. We were able to see pictures of it built and them actually worshiping in there. Yeah. I don't know. COVID has hit things there, but I can remember going to the ones where you had half of the people were actually kind of outside. They would just have an overhang for people to sit on, and it was 1,000 people. And the amazing thing is you get this big, big church, and there's like 4 or 5 cars parked outside. They all either walk or took a bus. Yeah.
Does he qualify, since he identifies more as an agricultural expert, I'm wondering, does the government support any of the work he does?
No, the government doesn't. No, the government doesn't. Because the government, anything they can do to not have to pay for things, the government, yeah. No, but they appreciate the work he does, that's for sure. He's gotten government assistance, for instance, with his tree planting. In other words, the government will help pay for the trees, but he organizes the people and the work to plant them. So in that sense, you get government help, but not for anything that you would see as the church itself. But in things that help the community, he's gotten government assistance that way, yeah.
Well, for seed and other,
No, he wouldn't get that. It would have to be something seen as helping the whole community, whereas seed would just be for a particular farmer and so forth. Or for raising for the church to give out. That the government wouldn't do that.
Now, the well was paid for
By us, yeah, we paid for that pipeline. Well, actually, we're talking about building a well, but he was advised to instead build a pipeline to an existing well, because if you build a well, then you have all this problem over people fighting over it. And the important thing with that work is, even though we financed it, the government controlled it. And that was good, because when the government controls it, you don't have people fighting over it because the government's in control. If they had just built a well themselves, that could be a source of violence and contention. But if you leave it in the government hands, that keeps, because again, like I said, the government doesn't favor any faith. But if one of them steps out of line, they'll clamp down on it. And that's why they mainly had problems with Muslims. See, the Muslim faith does not know how to operate as a minority. most faiths, like Christianity, know what it's like to operate as a minority, because that's how they started. The Muslim faith, it starts with them conquering everybody, and they're the majority. So they don't cooperate well.
Andrew was, spent 2 weeks when he was at Oxford University when he was a junior, at a program in Stansky Most, Bosnia. And he was telling, he'd come back and he'd say, you know, the Muslims have built all these beautiful mosques, right? I don't know the word. But he said there are no programs for the youth. He was working actually in a youth center. And, you know, it's just they build the building and then that's it.
Well, where do they get the money to do it?
Well, from the
Arab oil. And when you have money that way, you're not, whereas when you do it from the ground up, like the Lutheran Church Quebec is working with, and you make your money through the women, you know, with their products and the crops and stuff like that, the people really own it then, and they're going to see the whole idea of it. Yeah, exactly.
Listening to you describe the breadth of what Quebec does suggests to me that he has a very broad skill set,
Yeah,
politically savvy,
yeah, absolutely.
certainly knowledgeable in the mechanics and
Yeah.
science of agronomy, building plants, as an economist because of selling stuff, and people skills, obviously people skills. Just got a very broad skill set.
He is set for that kind of work. If Quebec were doing strictly agriculture research, he wouldn't be as equipped. That's why he had problems finding jobs. But to do what he does, he doesn't need to have high-level agronomy understanding, but more simplistic ones that are very practical for those people. So his skill sets are just matched up perfectly for what he does. Absolutely.
So you want to say something about the truck and why we're trying to get a new truck?
Well, to do the work in this final area, first of all, you have to understand, when Quebec buys a truck, he buys a used truck. He can't afford a brand new one, number one. Number two,
Some of us in America do that.
yeah, exactly. You understand that. You understand that, okay? Secondly, the roads, the way the roads are, and the kind of thing that they're, and yet Quebec babies those things. He really takes good care of them. Even though you look at this truck and think, it's in good shape, it's 200,000 miles on it. Oh, wow. And those kind of miles. So, especially be able him to do this final work in Cotulla with the distance there, that's the reason why this will be the last step, and he has the need for that. So, that's why we're thinking in terms of the truck. Don, wasn't there one? Didn't we say 60? Yeah, Tyler. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. It depends on what the government's doing there. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, something like that too. Yeah, I don't know. But that just gives us kind of a goal. We don't know if that's going to work or whatever, but you never know until you actually start to actually purchase it. So, but, yeah.
All right, aye.
Yep. All right. Thank you for recording. Let's have a word of prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, we thank you for all the partnership that we've been able to have with people over in Ethiopia, with Quebec and his family. We ask that you continue to bless him, and bless him as he now focuses in the Gadoli area, so that we can continue to partner with people over there in your love. Amen. Thank you.